Forward, they cannot stop us now. Only hope to contain us. Let them try and knock us down. Onward, they'll never stop us now. So they hope to contain us. Let them try and knock us down. This is hallway memory flashback. We watch some sugarcoat.
Hey everybody, this is Sam from Out of the Armchair podcast. I hope everybody's having a great night tonight. As you can see, our surprise special guest is here. Before we get started tonight, though, if you like what you see, go down there on that YouTube channel and click that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with every conversation that we have. You get notifications right through your mobile phone, your tablet, or your computer every time we upload something. Also, you can follow us on Facebook at Out of the Armchair Podcast, on Instagram, Out of the Armchair Podcast, all one word, and on Twitter at Of Armchair. So make sure you go and like and follow and click all those links so you can stay up to date with what we're talking about. So I guess we'll start out the night by welcoming my friend Tom Butler. How you doing, Tom?
Good to see you again, Sam. It's good to be here.
Yeah. I'm glad to have you here. I mean, when you called me up and said you were interested in coming on the podcast, I got really excited.
Me too.
You got some special news you're going to put out tonight. We're going to talk about some of your ideas and kind of let it grow from there. So,
great.
Why don't you tell us about yourself? Tell us about your background, your educational background.
Okay. Well, my name is Tom Butler. I've lived in Elkhart for about 22 years. I was originally born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, kind of under the shadow of the Golden Dome. I grew up with a lot of people that had kids, that they were professors or administrators at Notre Dame. I went to Stanley Clark, which was a totally private school. It wasn't a parochial Catholic, or other parochial school. It was private school. I went to high school at South Bend St. Joe, and then I went to Indiana University Bloomington. I had been gone to private schools my whole life, and I told my parents, I really want to go to a public school, and I want to go to IU, and Bloomington's a great deal. Being in state is really a great opportunity, and I felt it, and I got it, and I have absolutely no regrets. So I went to Indiana University Bloomington. I started to take some graduate level classes in my field, which was public administration, my undergraduate degree. When I started, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go to business school or whether I wanted to do government. I was very interested in science. I was good at science, and so I talked to people, and they said, well, if you're interested in science and the environment, which I was, and environmental protection, the problems that were going on with the environment, you really want to go into SPIA, you want to go into government, public administration, because the government's going to solve the problems regarding the environment, which is kind of a different mindset than has occurred, over the past, next, 10 or 20 years later. But I've worked in private sector. I've been interested in that, but I got my start in government. I got accepted in a accelerated master's program. I started to take some graduate level classes as an undergrad because I thought they'd be really interesting and thought I might be able to hack them because I had good grades by the end. And then it worked. I actually got accepted. I didn't know that there was even this opportunity called an accelerated master's where I could double count those same classes. And I mention this because it's a good opportunity for a lot of people that are interested in accelerating their education, getting a master's degree in less time, getting more value out of college. And I wasn't aware of that program until they offered it to me. And so I started to take some graduate level classes. But then I actually felt that I wanted to get some more experience because a lot of people that just go from undergrad to grad school and don't work don't get the real world experience of working. And you and I, who've worked for a number of years, know it's way different than college and the working world. So I started to do some internships, and I did my first one at the Monroe County Solid Waste Management District. Then I was worked for the City of Bloomington Environmental Commission. I was a researcher for the City of Bloomington Environmental Commission, and then after that, I did an internship for the state Department of Environmental Management my second year, and I slowed down to actually do an accelerated master's. I could have done it in a year and a half, but I did it in 3 years because I worked actually full time on a lot of internships and went to college, went to graduate school, kind of like either part time or small full time, like 6 or 9 credit hours.
Wow, so you were a pretty busy guy. You were like,
I thought that the busiest that one could ever be was working 2 internships and going to graduate school. I thought, this is as busy as a human could possibly be. Then I had twin babies. And when I had twin babies, that blew anything else out of the water I'd ever experienced in terms of hard work. Working a job and their mother was had some serious complications from having such large twins. I mean, my combined weight of my twins was 15 pounds. It was almost a record
wow.
in Cook County, and so she had some complications from that, and she was laid up for a couple of weeks. So I was taking care of 2 babies by myself with the wife in the hospital, and that was way more work than anything I could have ever thought about when I was working like 2 different, I had an assistantship for the city of Bloomington doing geographic information system programming. I was working for IDEM doing site investigation work for the Department of Environmental Management for the state. And then I was taking 9 credit hours of graduate school at the same time. And that was busy. Then after that, I went, and after I graduated, I got a job. I had an actual opportunity to work for a congressman's office, and knowing what I know now about government and how government really works, in the almost 30 years I've been out, from when I started. I guess it's been about 25 years since I graduated from graduate school. I've learned how government really works versus very theoretical policy approach that we learned in school about how government's supposed to work and how it's supposed to be structured and how it's supposed to be kind of a meritocracy, but we know it really often isn't that way. So it was one of those things where I should have worked for the congressman's office, but that job didn't pay as much. I got a job working for Booz Allen and Hamilton, which was one of the premier top consulting firms in D.C. I worked in Northern Virginia in the headquarters office, 1,600 people working in one office building, $2 billion worth of government revenue came to this organization. It actually, incidentally, interesting coincidence, Edward Snowden, the guy that went to Russia after disclosing, all the things that were going on with the Iraq War, and releasing all that secret information, he went to the hinterland of Russia after a short time, after he kind of really, saw the corruption in federal government. I went to the hinterland of Elkhart, Indiana, so instead of Russia, to work for a friend of mine in business who was doing pretty well. Good friend of mine from high school that was really doing great things with his dad's business, and I was still always drawn by the private sector. I'm not somebody who was just wanted to work for the government. I enjoy private sector companies, enjoy private sector work. In some ways, and we can talk about that. There's pros and cons to privatization. There's pros and cons to how what government can do and the economics of it. But there's no doubt that capitalism, in my mind, after 25 years of work experience in both public and private sector, capitalism does end up with a more pleasant, I think, and an enjoyable and cooperative workplace environment. And so it's good to try to do. I think I encourage everybody who works for the government to not spend their entire career working for the government. And everyone who's in private sector and very successful as business people should get experience with government and how government works and actually try to solve the problems the government can solve. And so that's been the story of my life. I've kind of gone back and forth. I'm really interested now in getting a position on city council, being elected to the city council of Elkhart. I think I have a lot to offer in terms of perspective and experience and education and guidance and approaches.
So, okay. So since you opened that baggage there, let's go ahead and let's make that official. So exactly what are you saying? What are you saying here?
I am going to declare my candidacy right here, right now on your show for City Council at large once again, as an independent candidate for the general election, just as I did 4 years ago with the Elkhart Party when I ran for City Council at large and got about 3% of the vote. And a lot of people think that we changed the dynamics and caused the Republican takeover of council, which if you look at the numbers, I don't think is entirely accurate. I think that it's true that we brought a lot more voters in. We got a lot of people that voted for us, and between us three candidates, taking what was it, like 11, 12% of the vote for the city council at large in a 9-way race was significant percentage of the vote between all three of us, between Rose and Jason and myself. But if you look at the total that won, it's up around I think like 17%, but it's theoretically possible that 15% could have won. So I think there's an opportunity for an independent voice on council. I think it's good to have an independent voice on council. I've really had trouble being someone that's first educated in policy analysis and the economics of what makes government work, what makes government not work from an economic perspective, which is different than the political aspect of it, which most people start in government. When you talk to most people who are elected officials, they'll start their career in government in winning, in working for candidates that have actually won elections, that have actually gotten into office, and will then employ them at a low level, and they'll work their way up. Like Tim Neese, for example, he started as a driver for the Secretary of State of the state of Indiana when he was 18, 19 years old. He started driving the Secretary of State around to all his meetings, and that's how he got started in his political career. And the Secretary of State became his mentor for that. And that's common. That's the common approach. And then later they'll learn how to govern, right? They'll learn what actually works and what doesn't work in government. Now my degree, my experience, my interest, what my favorite thing to do is to try to figure out what actually works in government once you get elected. And then for the past 10 years, I've been actually trying to study how to get elected, and how to be influential and actually be successful at winning a campaign, be successful at being elected. And that is a completely different school. That's a completely different field of study in college. That's communications and political science, right? Which I took one political science class in college. I was one that really kind of didn't like that. I didn't enjoy political science when I was younger. I didn't see the value in it. I'm like, well, you just win, and political strategists can help you win, and then when you get in, then you can govern well. And it's really not that simple. It really isn't. We have to learn how to talk to voters, show them the benefits, not from this ivory tower perspective, but to actually connect to them in their lives. Show them that, academics who study policy science, like myself, and public economics, our goal is not to build this ivory tower elite world where we only win. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that do that. That's very disingenuous, but that really isn't a good fit for public administration, because we're constantly challenging each other in my favorite field of study as to what actually works for people, the people, the citizens, the government, what solves their problems, what gives them what they need in order to be successful with their lives and with society.
And I think that's one of the greatest functions of democracy is being able to have that conversation. Like I talk about it all the time. Like it's important to have, like you said, having a voice from an independent ticket on the city council can't be a bad thing.
No.
My idea of a good council would be a good mix of parties. So you have a lot of the same substrates of ideas coming together and discussing those ideas and figuring out what's best for the community. You know what I mean? Like that's my dream council right there. And it keeps everybody in mind. Those on the south side who don't have very much representation on the council right now. I'm sad to say, but not Dwight. He's a great representative of the south side. In my opinion.
Okay.
And so my next question would be, what do you think what is different in your approach now than when you ran onto the Elkhart ticket? What do you think has changed for you? Because it seems like you have this renewed energy and kind of a new way to approach this.
I've learned more about actually campaigning, about talking to people, communicating to people, listening to people. I just spent over a month in Ohio. I put about 2,000 miles in my car, about 96 miles, because I had a phone that measured how many steps I took.
I was following your pictures on
Facebook. Yeah. So I put about 96 miles on my shoes, threw them out when I was done because they were toast. They were pretty well used, $100 pair of shoes, and knocked on over 2,000 doors and talked to over 500 people in the Toledo, Ohio area, and that was really an acceleration of the campaigning that I've done. Obviously, when I ran for city council last time, I talked to a lot of people. I probably did. I don't know if I did quite that much, but I talked to a lot of people in Elkhart. I talked to hundreds and hundreds. I knocked on hundreds of doors, talked to hundreds of people, talked to many people, citizens of all different types. From business leaders to knocking on doors in poor neighborhoods. Public housing projects, the same as we did in Toledo. So I got a little more perspective on everybody because I grew up in a very different world than most people. In some ways it was real. In some ways it wasn't. Just as everybody's life is not as real as some other people's in some ways. So everybody has their own background. Mine was very different than someone growing up in a public housing project, but it wasn't like I was wealthy like all the many people that I went to private school with. It's only because I was an only child of two only children with parents and grandparents that had 3 generations of people with master's degrees, that for me to not graduate from college, it wasn't something that I would have felt like a failure. Mm-hmm. I would have felt like a little bit of a failure if I didn't even get a master's degree, because of on my dad's side, my grandmother was this woman with a master's degree in the 1950s, which was...
You had a lot of academic pressure, basically.
But my parents were cool about it. Because my parents got academic pressure, especially my dad when he was younger, he didn't want to do that to me. So he was good at letting me push myself, and he recognized I was the kind of person that pushes myself. The worst thing you can do with a child that's motivated is to push them even more, because you can burn them out. Mm-hmm. I've known people from my high school that had parents that were like doctors or lawyers, and some of them at some point in their academic career had a nervous breakdown. I know of 2, and they were smart kids. They were good kids. They were academic kids. They worked hard. They were good people, and I felt bad for them. And I was really, really happy and lucky that I had the father that I did and the mother that I did. My mom was a political leader, and in some ways, she actually ran for city council of South Bend, lost in a contested primary on the Republican side in a 3-way race, but she had like 20% or 25% of the primary vote. It was a legitimate turnout. She was well respected in the Republican Party in St. Joe County. She served as the secretary of the voter registration office when I was a teenager. She worked for the license branch. She had these jobs that were related to her politics. And she could have, if she wouldn't have dropped out of graduate school to have me, she would have been maybe the first woman ever to graduate from IUSB's MBA program, which was new at the time in the late 60s. She worked for the Associates. My grandmother worked for the Associates, which were that was the premier, wealthiest, fastest growing company that made the most money from like the late 1920s to like the 1950s in South Bend. The family that founded them, the Morris family, their money was the money that started First Source Bank, which became,
interesting, because
they had so much money, the Morris family. And the Associates was the first company to provide leasing to over-the-road trucks in the United States. And they got into a leasing market that didn't exist before. It was a really good business for them, really good banking. And so I grew up with the Murphy kids, who were the great-grandchildren of the Morris, of E.M. Morris, who founded it. And my grandmother in the 1930s was a lowly secretary in one of the early pictures of the Associates, where she's, there's like 30 or 40 people at a company picnic, and there's my grandmother in the background. So my family worked for some good employers and had some success, but they were never really high level wealthy executives. They were, and same thing with government. My mom was the person that kept the office running. She was one of the main secretaries there. There were two, one Democrat and one Republican, because there were two appointees, political appointees, and she was the one that was there all the time, that through multiple administrations, and knew the ins and outs of that department. And she used to put in a lot of work, before they stopped this voter registration early. When I was a teenager, people were allowed to register to vote up to a few days before the election started. And then she would have to really burn the midnight oil sometimes and make sure that all the records, everything was up to date, in the couple days before the election, so that everybody's votes could count, the people that had registered just a few days before. And then she was there to help, make sure that the office was running smoothly, answer any questions, get any voter challenges, help people get to the right precinct. And she was a precinct chair for the Republican Party in my neighborhood. And so I got to help when I was a teenager, help, elderly people get out of their house to vote. I remember when I was 16 years old, just got my driver's license. I was driving around picking up elderly people on voting day, taking them. I helped my mom's campaign putting signs in the yard. So I kind of grew up with all that political stuff, and I just kind of took it in stride. Okay, I kind of got a heads up on that stuff. This is how people get elected, is by, working on campaigns and doing that. And it didn't really, the extent to which the complexity of campaigns run wasn't something that interested me. What interested me in college was, and what I really enjoyed and loved was, well, how does government solve these big problems? Like, global warming's coming. Like, there's a lot of pollution. I mean, when I was a child growing up, we would drive through a cloud of pollution in Chicago, through Gary. And it was like China is now, okay, with all the steel mills and everything. And then that all got cleaned up and fixed in my late teens and early 20s, and all that went away. I'm really privileged to be, I think, part of this generation that's this kind of transition. My parents were war babies. They weren't baby boomers. And my dad was one of this early ham radio operators, which was kind of like the internet of its day. It was that level, the technology of the radio transmitters. And he had these mentors, these role models, because my dad never knew his biological dad. He was adopted by a stepdad at a time and place when a lot more people had, normal families, so-called normal families. Nowadays, that's really common for people to come from broken homes. But my dad came from a broken home and never knew his biological dad. And he had an awesome stepdad, but his stepdad really worked a pretty good job for a company. He was an engineer at a really growing and vibrant company called Uniroyal. And he got transferred out to Connecticut to work for their corporate headquarters as an engineer. And he was busy when my dad was growing up. And so my dad got on this ham radio, and his mom was really great and encouraged him. Every child has to have a hobby. So he got on this radio and started to talk to all these guys that were World War II veterans and these older guys that became these father figures for him. And when he was younger, when he was a teenager, he got this amateur radio license and got this extra class license. He did really, really good, got this high level license. And so a lot of the old timers, the radio people, these people that were World War II veterans, the greatest generation people, were his mentors, his role models, his father figures that helped him grow and mature in life and become an electrical engineer at Purdue, and helped him with teach him. And so I grew up with a 50-foot tall antenna in the backyard of my house, could talk Morse code all over the world.
Nice.
And it was really a unique experience, but I wasn't wealthy. Okay, I was from a smaller house, and my parents put a lot into my education. But again, I was kind of unusual in that a lot of times I was the poorest kid in my class. But I wasn't really poor. I was middle class. I would have been very average in the public schools, you know. So that's kind of my background and kind of what interested me in trying to help people, because I had the perspective of being a middle class person in an upper class world, and so I was kind of the outsider in some ways and the underdog, and I felt a little of the struggle a little more than my friends, and saw them, you know, but every, rich kids have their own struggles too.
Oh yeah.
The mainly with their families. A lot of times, their dads and moms are really busy.
Mhm.
You know, if you have somebody that's making, there's no doubt that people who make a lot of money, everybody that makes a lot of money, works a lot of hours. I mean, that's universal truth.
Yeah, but the business starters, I mean, a lot of them damn near lose their families in the first 5 years their businesses are open because they're dedicating so much time. It's, you're literally raising a baby.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So that's an important. It's important. It's kind of like being a lower class citizen in public schools. So it's kind of comparative that way. That's neat that you had that experience, I think.
Yeah.
So in being elected to city, okay, I really care about Elkhart. Obviously,
Right.
I grew up there. I swam in every body of water there. I used to shoot down the creek when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Born and raised in downtown Elkhart, and obviously I care a lot about it. I've done a lot of work in the community. Even before the Shamrocks, we were doing repairs for the low-income historical neighborhood when code enforcement was battering them down.
Right.
So we got them free paint, did repairs for them. I worked with they're gonna kill me because I'm gonna slaughter the name. Um, what's his name that runs the sets up the jazz festival? I can't remember now. But it was a coalition put together downtown Elkhart of guys who, like the local lawyers and businessmen,
Yeah.
who were investing in uplifting and rebuilding, and beautification of some of the more poorer neighborhoods.
Right.
So I was able to connect with them and get a lot of work done in those areas.
Because that was your neighborhood, and you were happy to see these people come in, and you wanted to chip in and help out. It's like, yeah, this is great. This is we're really doing this.
You do this kind of work? Yeah, I do that kind of work. You're a perfect candidate. So I go in there and and just pretty much volunteer my time. So I care a lot about Elkhart, and I care. Looking back, we haven't had the greatest relationship with our local government as citizens. We haven't had a great relationship with law enforcement. We haven't had. There's been a breakdown of relationships, and I want to get into economics too because that's a huge deal in Elkhart. But
so that breakdown of relationships isn't unique to Elkhart. There's a great book out there called Bowling Alone. That's about the civic breakdown in America that's happened during your lifetime, my lifetime, mainly started during my lifetime. And that book talks about that, about how these civic leaders aren't connected anymore, in the way that they used to be. And you hear from the old timers, the people that I worked at the Truth newspaper with when I was local sales manager and the market research manager for the Truth. You kept hearing about the good old days and the good old people that were so valuable and so useful to the community and what they did. And you had this perspective. So when is this going to happen again? When am I going to get the chance? And I joined the Chamber of Commerce Leadership Academy in early 2000, I think 2002 maybe. Can't remember the exact year. And we did some projects. I helped renovate and fix up the Childhood Development Center on the south side of Elkhart. That was a project from my group that we were doing. And but you'd hear about people like was it Speed Owens, the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that way back in the day, 50, 60 years ago, doctors were connected to their community. They didn't move around from place to place.
Yeah.
And
even when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I went and seen Dr. Greenlee. That's who we seen my entire life until I think he retired. So yeah.
And they would do things like be involved in the community. They would volunteer their time. They would Speed Owens was a guy that was always talked about as being this great civic leader. And I kept looking for these people, and there were a few people that were retired that were doing that, but I was seeing it fade away in Elkhart, but also in South Bend. The lack of leadership that we had growing up at my age in South Bend, during the 70s and 80s is when this changed. During the 60s and 50s and 40s and before that, it was different. With wealthy people would give back to their community. And if you look at, all the people that were local business owners, and most of them were now, versus now when you have big corporations and shareholders that are all over the world for a lot of businesses and a lot of franchises that control a lot of the business spending in our city, that local ownership has gone away. And that's the connection, I think. And I can talk more about that. We can talk about it now, but I think that's what makes my economic policies and my background and my vision a little bit different, is that I'm one of the youngest people you'll ever see that has stories about my grandmother growing up as a Polish immigrant in 1910, or the daughter of Polish immigrants in 1910 in downtown South Bend, because she lived a long life, and I didn't have any brothers or sisters or aunts or uncles or cousins, so I spent a lot of time talking to my grandmother and grandfathers, and I had 3 that lived a long life. And then my dad's friends would come over, and these were people that were young people during the Great Depression. The struggle was real for them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some funny stories about some of those people and how crafty they were, the skills that they had to be self-sufficient. A lot of the people that grew up during the Great Depression, and those people became the greatest generation, right? And I have this concept that they became the greatest generation because they grew up in a time when one had to be self-sufficient to get by, and they gained those skills, but they also had the empathy, the sympathy to know what it was like to struggle, to grow up poor, to grow up without many opportunities, but to make the best of it. And then when they had opportunities, when the world changed and the economy boomed in the 50s and 60s, those people would give back. The people that helped out my dad, because he was, a lonely only child who didn't even have a dad or a stepdad that was around very much. Well, those people stepped up. They'd go in and help my dad. Spend time with them. He had retired people spending time with, that had means that would help people, and that sense of community is I think the most important thing to get back.
Yeah, especially for someplace like Elkhart.
Right.
You hear these terms all the time, Elkhart, and
Right.
people constantly tear this place down, and I often try to remind people when I get in those conversations that this is literally one of the best cities to live in, for the simple fact that you can, and I don't encourage people to drop out of school, but you can drop out of high school and make $1,000 a week,
Right.
and make an okay living here.
Right.
It's very unique in that way.
Correct.
And so I don't think people appreciate necessarily, where they live, where they've been born at, I guess it's going to lead me into an economic question. Because, I've been an RV worker most of my life. I work for myself now, but
Right.
most of my life I've been a production worker, and I was, back on the production lines when all we made was piece rate. Right. There was no,
Right.
bonus or anything like that. A very, very different culture in the RV factories back then than what you have today. Kind of like what you were saying with good old days, right? You had guys that just go in there and get their work done as fast as they could, make as much money as they could. Nowadays it's a little different. And when we had that collapse in 2006,
Right.
So when that happened, for me, I'm just going to speak personally here, right? I lost everything. Everything. I had a music studio going. I had, I had a nice car, had a nice house. I was taking care of my family. We only had one child between me and my wife then, and suddenly, my security blankets yanked out from underneath me for reasons that are beyond my control, and sometimes I think even beyond the city's control, obviously because
Sure.
of the national crisis then, but. And that really took a lot of the sense of security in what our major industry is here out of people. So when we start to see these stockyards filling up with RVs, we start to know that that's a tell sign that something's going to crash here soon, and
Yeah.
it scares us a little bit. So being on the city council, and I'm not sure.
It's a unique perspective though, Sam, because okay, so we saw how many presidents visited Elkhart how many other cities that have a population of 50,000, 55,000 people will have, what, 4 presidential visits and 6 candidate or 7 candidate visits in the past, 4 or 5 years? And everybody likes to talk about Elkhart. President Obama played a neat trick in that he knew that it's a luxury good, this entire industry. He had to know that he could come into Elkhart when it was at its worst, at the peak of the recession, and say, I'm going to help you all, and then come back later and say, look at how much better things have gotten, right? And it's all based in President Obama I don't think there's a single RV factory owner or RV worker who would say, oh yeah, President Obama had these perfect policies, economic policies, that were perfectly designed to get the RV industry going again. Is there anybody you think that ever said that?
No.
Right.
No.
So what he was doing was looking at the macroeconomics of getting the country back on track again in his way. And when he did that, he knew the RV industry was going to come back because it's based on luxury goods. But those of us in the RV industry, and I've spent just a little bit of time working in the RV industry. I spent most of my time not. I'm one of the few people that actually has lived in Elkhart for 23 years that hasn't spent much time working in the RV industry, maybe like a year or so at most. But
well, good for you. Now, big ups to you for that. I mean,
no, I mean, they wouldn't let you. When you go to work in the RV industry, and a lot of people get this when they interview, if you're not from the first question they ask you is, have you ever worked in the RV industry before, right?
Right.
And if the answer is no, you're probably not going to get a job in the RV industry, right?
Yeah, I just had this conversation with my niece the other day. She's trying to break into the RV industry.
Right.
And it is one of the hardest things to do. You know how I got in is I worked construction prior to being 18. So
right.
I could read a tape measure, run a screw gun. I had those skills already. So I mean, that's one way to break into it. But yeah, it's really hard. Yeah,
and so, but I had a career of coming into a different industry, and at a professional level, and that's not something that lends itself to then transitioning into the RV industry.
No,
at all. They want you to work your way up from the ground floor up from a very young age. Is their mentality in the RV industry. I think that's what I've seen. But I've done some work for some businesses that were in the RV industry, but not traditional RV, final unit manufacturers, like people in different parts industry or supplier industries or other support industries.
Distributors and stuff, basically.
Distributors, yeah. Retailers and things like that, and done some contract work for business development to suppliers in the RV industry. So, when I've worked as an independent contractor, helping people like, for example, with intellectual property development, that's what I did at the time for one part supplier. Helped them because I had experience in the environmental industry with patents, at the time when I came in. So, like 2008. So that was my experience with the RV industry. So, Obama didn't have this plan, but he had this vision of the greater economic picture, right? As all the politicians come and portray themselves in Elkhart as having. They come to Elkhart so that they can have this image when they go to other parts of the country. Yeah, I know how to make businesses work. I know how to make manufacturing work in America because I spent time in Elkhart, right? I mean, or I've helped as a president, my economic policies have helped turn the RV industry around. So when it turns around on its own, because by nature you're selling an extreme luxury good. So when times are good, it's going to boom. And when times are bad, it's going to crash. It's the nature of the product that you produce.
Well, one of the things that I've learned along my way, and I work for a pretty prestigious company, making a pretty prestigious product, and they actually started up during the recession. And what they
time to start
right, and what they did is they served the luxury market, the high-end luxury market, because their idea was, recession or not, rich people don't stop spending money.
And that's a good idea to have, especially as more inequality increases in our country. There's our entire economy.
Inequality, you're talking about the wage gap, right?
Yeah, the wage gap, the inequality between the people that make really, really amazing money, because the CEO pay has gone up orders of magnitude since about one order of magnitude at least, I think, since I was a kid. It was already, like maybe 15 or 20 times, but now it's like 75 or 100 times more than the average worker, or more, 500 times now in some cases. So that lends itself to two different markets now that are emerging, and a middle class market that used to be the one that was served when I was a young child, all the ads, that is now gone away, in business. So now we have this market that serves the high-end luxury goods and the market that serves the low-end poor people. You got the Family Dollars and the corner shops is growing. That's what's being developed. And then you've got really high-end luxury goods being produced for people, right? I mean, that's what we see the economy developing right now in the business world.
Absolutely. We keep losing our monitor up here for some reason. I'm not really sure.
Second.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not the, yeah. Okay. So thank you. I love having side-off conversations. This is kind of cool because we got some people in the room tonight. So it's kind of like, Out of the Armchair is filmed before a live studio audience type of thing.
You want some candle after?
Yeah. Okay. So, let's see.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Because what I ran the first time, what I opened with is when the question always gets asked to any council candidate or any mayoral candidate, what's the biggest problem in Elkhart and what are you going to do to try to solve it in every debate, right? So I think the biggest problem we have in Elkhart is it's also our greatest opportunity. It's the RV industry, is that we don't have the same kind of economy that most people have of businesses providing different opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very monoculture to a luxury market, and so it'll go through booms and busts. So ideally, it goes all the way back to the Horizon Project. So this is not something new. Everybody who's been in the RV industry that I've talked to has known about these crashes. There's very few, unless they're really a young, naive construction guys just coming in. But anybody's been in it for a while says, oh yeah, these booms and busts have been going on forever in this industry.
Yep.
And everybody knows it. And the business community here has known it all the way back to 1998, okay? So there was a project called the Horizon Project where a group of local business leaders, ex-business, organized by the Chamber of Commerce, spent millions of dollars in research on this project. Started in 1998, then they did another project in 2002, a second round of the Horizon Project. The goal was, okay, what are our economic strengths and weaknesses in Elkhart County? What are we doing well? What are we doing poorly at? What can we improve at? And they came to the same conclusion. The greatest weakness and greatest strength was the RV industry. But they said, what we need to do is diversify our economy. We need to have broader opportunities. We need to have more professional opportunities for people. We don't have as many professional workers. We don't have as many professional service workers. We don't have as many professional industries. We don't have the so-called jobs of the future, the high technology jobs. We're totally lacking in that. And that's been known to the point by the business leaders all the way back to 1998. But yet, every single time there's a crash, the RV industry gets stronger and the rest of the economy gets weaker for over and over and over again. And so I said, okay, here we are, and it's another economic boom. And the Horizon Project is twice. The top business leaders in our community have recommended we diversify our economy. Yet, the RV industry is more consolidated in Elkhart than it's ever been before. It's at greatest risk of weakness. We're going to have, if it does crash again, well, it's not if, we know it's a when, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, how many people think that the RV industry is never going to crash again?
Well, I think you just said something really interesting. I'll get back and answer your question, but you just said something really interesting, how it's even more constrained now. Because, see, what happens is, and what I think a lot
it's
of
more corporate. You only have a couple of businesses. It used to be a lot of entrepreneurism in the RV industry.
So if you work for Thor, okay,
right.
Let's say you work at the Bighorn division, and another Thor division crashes,
right,
and suffers, right? And then because you are under this parent company,
right,
your location is likely to suffer from that crash as well.
Right.
So that's kind of what he's talking about here. So okay, and now if you would repeat your question, I'll answer.
Oh yeah, well that's okay. I mean, you get it. I mean, so, but the question is just how many people think that and I can get an audience show of hands. How many people think that the RV industry is never going to crash again? Not a single hand.
Not a single hand out of 55.
Yeah. So and then I mean, and I'll bet the audience out there, I would be struggling. Okay, so now how many people? How does our local news, our local business leaders, how often do they talk about the RV industry crashing? Unless it's already crashed. During times of good, when do they talk about it actually crashing?
Never.
Never. They never talk about it crashing. So we are like have our heads in the sand. And they did talk about it. We spent millions of government dollars, our taxpayers' dollars, well, Chamber of Commerce dollars. I'm not sure how much government dollars. There was probably some that went into the Horizon Project. I'm not sure exact
I
amount.
would guess so.
Yeah, I mean, usually government chips in those type of economic development research projects that are designed to help the whole community, as they should. So the business leaders did that. They actually said, okay, here's the official paper. So what happened to that document? It got buried. It hasn't been used. I mean, the Horizon Project, you can go look it up. You can go to Library Report. You can see the business leaders from yesteryear.
We'll provide a link in the descriptions for that.
Yeah, the Horizon Project, it's there. Now, they have changed some of it. They've kind of summarized some of the older studies because that maybe they didn't like the fact that they're not addressing the problem and they wanted to try to cover it up a little bit. I don't know. Maybe they just are trying to summarize it, but they don't talk about the conclusions as much as they used to. You know, when I worked for the Truth newspaper, me being the big public economics geek that I am, and how much I love studying it and have ever since I started college, you know, I was always talking to people who were business leaders. When I worked for the Truth newspaper, we had some great ones. You know, our publisher, David Ogle, at the time was one of the greatest community leaders that I know of in that era.
What happened to him?
Good question. He went to work for the Economic Development Corporation, and he did some things. He did some work, but then you didn't hear as much about David Ogle. And he
I reached out to him a few times.
Have you?
Yeah, with a nonprofit.
And I reached out for him a few times when I worked for the company. And I was always interested, okay, what are we doing with the Horizon Project? How are we diversifying our economy? And I talked to the Chamber of Commerce Leadership Academy. And no one seemed to have any good answers on how is the Horizon Project actually being actualized? How are we actually, as government leaders, how are we as business leaders, how are we diversifying our economy now in Elkhart? We haven't.
Right.
We still haven't. We haven't for 20 or 30 years, even though everybody knows we need to. Everybody knows it needs to be done. But who's doing it?
Well, and just in the RV industry, you've seen this sudden. So when we had this technology jump recently, right?
Right.
That made its way into the RV industry naturally.
Sure.
Okay, but you suddenly had a lack of people that knew how to, you know, design those systems, how to install and implement those systems, and it seemed like, you know, a lot of people got left behind. And like, my main job has been in electricity.
Right.
Okay. A lot of RV electrical workers aren't don't think about, like, I can look at systems and just understand how they're run, how they're supposed to be hooked up, how they should be implemented, and how they can be best.
And a lot of the people just have to follow the directions, follow the wiring harness instructions. Run this wire here and run.
You put the bolt in, you put the nut on. You know what I mean? And so when we had that shift, a lot of people were left behind, and it seemed like it took 15 years for them to finally say, hey, we should probably open an RV technology school.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I really felt like, I don't know if it was the RV industry that let people down because they weren't giving them proper training and trying to say, well, you should be doing this and you should be, you know, putting out these product numbers.
I wouldn't blame the whole RV industry because the community, the leadership of the community let the people down. Because think about it, during the 90s and early 2000s when and I came here as a guy that helped. So I wasn't working, when I worked for Bruce Allen Hamilton, I wasn't working some lucky muck, you know, Department of Defense project. I was a consultant to the US EPA. What we were doing at the time is we were building something called Circlus, which was this big database that would govern and manage all the information, take all the paper that was in all the different offices for the Superfund program, and centralize it in one organized database that every project manager on every Superfund site anywhere in the country could access and learn from to learn about various solutions for pollution on different projects. It was a high technology database driven system that was relying on the fledgling new internet of the 1990s to everybody could put their national database for their industry or their government program on and reap the benefits of that. So the 90s were this huge technology boom. There was lots of people. I had good jobs in the 90s, very good jobs in technology. I got promoted to be an IT manager for a company for a time. So everybody was talking about this, and the business leaders in the Horizon Project were talking about how we need to have the jobs of the future technology. Now, if we would have done that in the 90s and 2000s, if our community would have actually invested time, money, energy, if the business leaders would have, in the chamber, and would have done that, guess what? It would have helped the RV industry too, because it would have, now you have people in other industries or other technology centers in the area. The RV industry could have pulled help from those companies, could have pulled consulting from those companies, could have pulled employees from those companies, and now we've got a more robust, diverse economy, and this robust, diverse, modern, high technology economy is now also helping the RV industry too.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes total sense. I mean,
Yeah.
but you got to. It's kind of like sharing experience,
Right.
Shared experience, pretty much. And okay, so what do you think it would take to diversify the economy in the way? I mean, we're so constrained to. I mean, just in our own mental faculties, like this is the RV capital of the world. You know, we're pretty proud of that.
I had a great opportunity when I worked at the Truth newspaper to have a really, really cool job for way over a year. It's the most fun job I've ever had. I was the market research manager. So my job was to try to do deep foundational research on how our company can be successful and how our advertisers can be successful. Okay, how can they build their businesses? How can we build our business as a newspaper? And that was my job, was to work on the very research level of sales. How do we build our business for the future? How do we help our customers build their business for the future through advertising on the Truth newspaper? And so I would show them how they would do it. During the process of that, because I was so economically interested in what's going on, I was previously the local sales manager for the newspaper, and you know, just at the time, as we saw in all industries, the time we're moving more to from local business and local ownership to national corporate ownership. That happened in the RV industry this last crash. Okay, you have two companies, Thor and Forest River, that are big corporations, have now taken over most of the industry. But when before, you had a number of companies, 10, 12, 13 big ones, probably.
Yeah.
And then before then, you back up another 10 years before, you had 100, businesses before that. That's when Elkhart in the 80s had the highest population of millionaires.
Yeah, and it was made up of a bunch of basically mom and pop shops.
Yep.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
got big. And those mom and pop shops rolled up into about 12, and then those 12 rolled up into 2.
Mm-hmm.
Each time there was a big crash, then it rolled up to another level. And that happens not just in the RV industry, that's happened in all industries in America. It's also been pushed and catalyzed through the so-called trickle-down theory of economic development, and the way that the government helped restore businesses during the after the Great Recession in 2008. The government's basically started to buy up people's bonds at the top, their corporate bonds, and then they could reinvest. But it was okay for them to use that money to buy other companies, right? So they basically, free money from the government flowed into the economy to help improve the economy, and that money was often used on mergers and acquisitions, which doesn't really help grow the economy, does it? No, it just helps people get richer who are already in the industry. When they buy somebody else out. Now, one person that bought has more control. The other person that got bought out has more cash.
Right.
So, but government money was used for that, the bailout, which is why I was so active in the Occupy movement, because the way that the government was using their money was so wrong. It wasn't going to help us, and it sets up the next economic crash. So, same thing in Elkhart, okay? So this local businesses are getting bought up and going away, and retailers, and the government's even catalyzing it. You had all these investments in companies. The whole goal of economic development was, we need to help stimulate and recruit these businesses with TIF districts to get these big companies to locate here, come here, get them to come here. Well, if you really look at what drives economies, it's local ownership. What drives communities is local ownership. What made communities better and stronger 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago was local ownership. Entrepreneurism and people who are local business people starting businesses, growing businesses, and then having money with people that have a connection to your community. They own the business within the community. They're not just an employee or a manager.
Well, they're touchable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but there's actually measured economic studies on how much better this is. And the best book I ever read about it blew me away. It was called The Small Mart Revolution by Michael Schumann. And I read that when I was at the Truth newspaper, because I was doing research on how do we help ourselves do better. Because local businesses need us more than national businesses to get the message out because we're only a local newspaper. So we benefit more from local businesses with that. And also local businesses have local owners that benefit the community more because look at all the philanthropists of time past. If you look at all the public structures that have been built around, like the Morris Civic in South Bend, okay? E.M. Morris, local businessman who made it really big. Now he's got money. Where's he going to put that money? Back in his local economy. Yeah. And it seems common sense, and it's rarely talked about, but it's been economically studied too. I mean, it's a theory it's a hypothesis that everybody understands. They understand it's true, but you can actually do the numbers and prove it to be true by doing the right economic research. And a guy by the name of Michael Schumann did it. And he started an organization for the Center for. He started an organization, not for profit. There he goes. Valley Business Alliance for Local Economy, Local Learning Economies, a local Business Alliance for Local Leading Economies. And what it was an economic think tank and an economic development association that was for local businesses only. Kind of like the Chamber of Commerce is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but the Chamber of Commerce really, when you get into it, and I was in the Leadership Academy, they kind of do some entrepreneurism stuff. They've offered their upper floor available and got a grant from the Peanut Foundation for people to start up there. And there's the SCORE program, which is retired executives are supposed to help out. And they're there to help. There's some help with that. But they're not, the Chamber of Commerce that isn't a hill that they're dying on, the local Chamber of Commerce. They're not saying, okay, if we're not successful in helping people be entrepreneurs in our local community, we might as just roll up shop and shut down and cease to exist because we're not doing our job. There's not that drive. The Chamber of Commerce.
But what there seems to have been, though, is, okay, so there's been this, a lot of attention focused in the downtown area, right? The Gateway Mile. That's
right, all those TIFs.
Yeah, that's been a big ride for Chamber of Commerce.
Yep.
So, and I know a couple of the business owners, new business owners that just got their startup with the help of the Chamber of Commerce. But I think the motivation is wrong, right? The motivation, I think, is more into getting people to shop downtown and getting people to head downtown and utilize downtown. And it's not a well-rounded plan, I think.
Not for the whole city.
Not for the whole city. And
a
lot of wasted attention is going there.
Sure, it has. And then you had some capital projects like the bridge, like the Dick Moore Bridge over the train tracks there on Prairie Street that actually took out some local business.
Yeah.
And it wasn't restored.
Nope.
And if there's a long history of Elkhart development going into the South Side, and not necessarily building the kind of businesses that those people need. And then you have when they do things, it's money straight for outside real estate development that isn't necessarily the development for the local business owner itself. Like the Kroger's example. I live over by where Pierre Morin Mall used to be.
Yeah. And
Pierre Morin Mall failed, closed. I remember when I was taking my kids over there just to walk around, it was dead.
Yeah.
And they pulled it out. When I first came there, Alley Oops was in there in the 90s, and it was started kind of going, and
they had the fountain and everything.
The fountain and everything, and it was still a functioning mall. But so Kroger said, okay, we want to come in with the super cruise, and that's great because a lot of poor areas are in many parts of the country are food deserts. They don't have a grocery store right there.
Yeah, it's mainly convenience stores.
Mainly convenience store, family. Yeah, that's how. Boy, I tell you what, when I was in Toledo, it was really bad that way. The worst neighborhoods we went into, we're not being from there. I'm used to being able to just I'm doing politics in the area. I'm going door to door. I need to go to the bathroom. Used to just finding a place to go to the bathroom. Well, when you're in a very poor neighborhood like that, the businesses won't just let someone walk in and just use their bathroom.
The commodities aren't there.
Right.
Yeah.
So the only place was McDonald's.
There are amenities on it.
Yeah, amenities. And McDonald's required you to make a $3.25 purchase just to go in and use their bathroom.
That's how the downtown McDonald's used to be too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you grew up in that kind of neighborhood in downtown, and and that neighborhood that you grew up in has been targeted since the 1940s. They knew it was an economically disadvantaged area. And there's been some work that's been done, but obviously not enough.
Right.
The poverty rate has not gone way down in that neighborhood. It's gone up.
But I think, and just to kind of, give these people their due credit is, we do have a special group of people over on the south side specifically that are trying to make that happen. They're trying to bring the proper attention to Nancy Van Wormer.
Oh, yeah, Nancy's great. I worked with her. Yeah, there are, and then there are a number of people that are doing some good work on the south side. Absolutely, like Southside Inc. is a great organization.
Yeah, they actually asked me to join their board.
That's good. That's a great organization. I think they're doing good work. The Habitat homes they're building right now are just a couple blocks from my house.
Yeah.
And Cyber Field, and so Rick Newbill is my neighbor, and I've had some great conversations with Rick, so with the Roosevelt Center, it was great that they turned that into apartments. The city wanted to demo it, the people stood up to them and said, no, we want to save this school, we want to turn it into a community center, we want to have housing here. And guess what? It happened, and it's working great.
Still,
La Casa has done great work.
Yeah.
There's been some good economic development stories for sure.
Well, La Casa is why my mom owns a house now too.
Right.
So they're a great.
And home ownership is important, and it's challenging to do. I'm right now on my fourth house that I fixed up in Elkhart County, third house in Elkhart. This is the first one I bought a house on the south side. That was the worst house in the neighborhood, and my first tax auction house, and fixing it up. And I'm fortunate to be a homeowner. I'm able to do it just because I had a good run in the 1990s of good jobs, and things went pretty well. I raised my family, and I was able to make investments. And then I sold my nice house out in the suburbs, and that I've been making payments on for a long time. And then I was able to have the cash to buy outright a tax auction house. Fix it up and work on it. It's taken me a couple years to get there, but I'm getting close now, and it's certainly very livable. But a lot of people don't have that opportunity, especially your generation.
Yeah.
They just don't, and that's where organizations like La Casa are so important. Because to provide that funding. And Southside Inc.'s been involved with that kind of not-for-profit home ownership models. Habitat for Humanity is a great organization, and this kind of gets me to what I'm talking about the same kind of leadership in not-for-profits or government that works in business. There's this fallacy out there that is so common where people have this thought that just because it's government, it's not going to work. That the private sector, privatization always works. Well, if you kind of deconstruct the why it doesn't work, and you deconstruct why the private sector works well, why private sector companies are more efficient, or like look at what not-for-profits. I kind of look at them as the middle. What not-for-profits have done well? What ones have made it? What ones haven't? The what's caused it is, it's hard to dispute that meritocracy, the idea that if you work hard and work smart, you're going to get ahead, that's not a good idea for society.
That's just not true.
It isn't happening, but it is a good idea.
It is a good idea.
It's a good idea. It works. Anybody who's worked in a company or worked in government and seen people that don't do much work, that get there through knowing somebody, okay, that doesn't help the company as much as somebody that's a real go-getter that got their higher level job because they worked hard and they worked smart both, right?
Right.
So there's this breakdown in how we think about that. So we say the private sector is good because it has meritocracy, but yet we don't see as much meritocracy in the private sector as we used to in bygone days, 10, 20 years ago. Same thing for the government. Everybody says, well, there's no meritocracy in the government, so government can't work. Well, in theory, though, it can work just the same. the money's the same that funds it. You got tax dollars, you have investment dollars, you have income dollars. It's all money, okay? And it goes to an organization to do something with it, right?
Right.
Now that organization, to make it, has to do two things right. They have to have the right employees, they have to have the right managers, and they have to have the right idea of how to serve their customers and their customers what they need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that works for government, that works for private sector, that works for not-for-profit, right?
Right.
Okay, so where's the breakdown? Well, the breakdown's in meritocracy. It's sometimes we've seen it. All of us have been in the working world have seen it in businesses before.
Sure.
People see it most commonly in governments, not only in the United States but all the way around the world. We see governments that are run by people who know each other, have political connections, and that's seen as normal. It's seen as inevitable. But if we look far enough in the past, at certain times in certain places, we see that it doesn't happen everywhere in government all the time. And what causes it to work better or not work better? Well, what causes some government agencies to work better or some programs to work better? Well, it's a well-designed program. And it's got good people that actually care, like my mother. My mom worked as hard as any private sector employee at times for her government agency. And she did it just because that's the kind of person she is. And maybe she could have gotten away with it, being more lax, and maybe not. But if she would have been more lax, then maybe some people wouldn't have been able to vote. Maybe there would have been problems like we see now with people that think they get their registrations in and they don't, and things like that. And that has to do with the social responsibility. You have to have people that are socially responsible and a community that holds their government officials socially responsible.
Yeah.
And that's where the breakdown is.
Well,
But these people that are naysayers that say government can never work, there's been some great stories. Like if you go back let's go all the way back to the 1930s, to the Great Depression, the people that came over and helped my dad out, the people that were suffering when they were young people and had it tough when they were young before the economy got better. Well, FDR turned things, around, and how he did it in some places was really interesting. So we had, again, this whole irrational exuberance, this whole overinvestment in something that everybody else is investing in. That's what caused it. What was it that caused the overinvestment in the economy during the Great Depression? Well, I've actually got the book. I brought some books here to show kind of what a geek I am on government theory. This is the second oldest book I own. This is called The First Battle. It is a book by William Jennings Bryan, who is probably the most famous person to ever run for president of the United States and not actually get elected. And this is from his campaign against William McKinley in 1896. This is the entire history of his campaign. Every single campaign speech he gave. I've got the speech he gave in South Bend, Indiana, the speech he gave in Elkhart, Indiana. In 1896, his whole campaign, what it was based on, his philosophy, his views. He's best known as the Cross of Gold guy because he says, his famous speech is considered to be the most famous, most well-received speech in the entire history of the United States of America, where he says, we're being crucified under a cross of gold. And a lot of people don't know what that was, but we had a gold standard. People weren't able to coin silver currency. Since then, we've gone to total fiat currency that's just based on the economic value of the United States. But William Jennings Bryan saw that the banks had all the gold by this time, and they wouldn't allow new money to be created. So the farmers couldn't get the loans to invest in their land and develop the prairie and actually get enough production. There was a shortage of production in the late 1890s. Before then, 1880, 1870s, a lot of poor farmers that couldn't get the loans they could need to develop their land. Well, let's fast forward 30, 40, 50 years. After he gave his speech and he convinced people to invest in farmland in the United States of America, economic production went up a lot. And everybody's like, oh, what a great investment. I invested in farms in the U.S. We mined silver and we made silver currency, and then that created money, and that money that was created went into investing in farmers, and farms were built up, and farms had higher production. We had higher exports. America became the breadbasket of the world. This is going great, right? And so more and more and more people started investing in more and more farms. And then they started to buy land that wasn't very productive and invest in that, overinvest in land. Overinvesting. It's the same thing with happened in the dot-com boom. It's the same thing that happened in the housing boom. The Great Depression was caused by an overinvestment in agriculture, in agricultural production and in farming. So what happened when the Dust Bowl hit? Everybody lost their money in the banks.
Surprisingly, there's not a lot of people that know about the Dust Bowl. When I talk about it, a lot of people are like, "What are you talking about?"
That's why I have fun with this is going even further back. It's like, people know about the Dust Bowl, but if you go back, what?
Make a drink.
Yeah, go ahead, make a drink. I'll keep talking about ancient economics as related to government policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got the background. I'm educated now on the background, even behind what caused the run up, even to the positive investment. The people that encouraged that. Bryant was right at the time, but then eventually it went too far. You got overinvestment, in that. So when the Dust Bowl hit, and a lot of the farms failed, these were farms. A lot of these were marginal investments anyway. Mm-hmm. So we went from some of these investments would have failed. There would have been probably a small economic depression or recession if that ecological crisis hadn't happened too. But then that was like a double whammy.
Yeah.
And then we had the greatest economic depression in the history of the United States, and it was global, really. In the past couple hundred, there's really been nothing like it. I mean, even the Great Recession was about half as bad. We had 20-25% unemployment here. We had 40% unemployment, 45% unemployment in the 1920s and 30s. And millions of people would have starved for death if not for the government.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Southern Indiana, where I spent a lot of time studying and a lot of my life in Indiana University. So there's a lot of limestone there. And the reason is because the bedrock's really close to the surface of the earth, so that causes the rock to get really white and washed out and become good rock for building. That led to the a lot of the main mines for a lot of the big buildings and skyscrapers. Limestone is from Southern Indiana. Well, that same geology results in very thin soils that are very poor for crops, okay? And there's also a shortage of water down there. Why? Because all the water it's not like here. Here we have this really, really deep aquifer underneath here. You can, just about anywhere around here, you can run a well down and you'll get water.
Yeah, but 50, 60 feet. I think my well's like 68 feet down.
68 feet down. That's pretty deep, actually. You can get down to where the Continental Divide is near Napanee, and you can get, I was down near Warsaw, and he's got down like 25 feet he's got. All the water. Oh yeah, because that's right on the Continental Divide. So it's the highest point of the groundwater anywhere in the region. So like the whole half of North America or something. It runs. It's not a straight line, but it runs through southern part of Elkhart County on into Warsaw or close to it. Anyway, so Southern Indiana don't have that. They've got thin soils on top of bedrock that's very close to the soil. So there's not a lot of soil to grow crops in. So a lot of the farms that were down there, when they got blown away in the Dust Bowl, so who figured out not to actually turn those into cropland, corn or soybean farms again? Who figured that out? Was it industry? No. The government did. The government started a new organization called the Soil Conservation Corps. Their job was to make sure that this Dust Bowl never happened again, because there were two causes of the Dust Bowl. One was it was a drought, but the other cause was that farmers weren't using as good of soil conservation methods. They weren't saving the soil. They weren't doing low-till, no-till work. All that stuff was figured out by who? Scientists. Who funded them? Who hired them? The government. And that government research led to...
I love science.
Yeah, it's mostly funded by government, and so the science came up with the idea. Okay, here's how we save the soils. But there's some areas, no, you can't do crop soil. You can't raise corn or soybeans. It's never going to work. Not in Southern Indiana. So then they came up with the idea, okay, so what do we do with that land? Well, it's going to be pretty good for hardwoods. Let's start growing some walnut trees and some ash trees and these other trees. Those trees are going to hold the soil in place,
Yep.
and they're going to grow pretty good down there. They're going to grow big and tall, so let's get the soil. So the government, the federal government, created a national forest in southern Indiana with the previously wiped out farmland that was dead there.
Wow.
And they created the Hoosier National Forest. And
That's interesting.
and who built the Hoosier National Forest? The Civilian Conservation Corps. These were people that were unemployed farmers and unemployed workers that the recession wiped out. And the government took government money and hired those people to plant millions and millions and millions of trees. So then what happened? Well, 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, those trees are growing. And now, so what's the third most important? So we know that there's corn in Indiana. We know there's soybeans in Indiana. What's the third biggest crop in Indiana?
Trees?
Hardwoods.
Hardwoods.
Multi-billion-dollar industry. $2 billion, $3 billion industry. So my favorite story is Mitch Daniels goes to, takes a trip, economic development trip to Asia, where they wiped out all their trees. And you know, to Taiwan over there. And so he's talking about how successful his economic development trip is to Southeast Asia, where he's helping encourage, you know, jobs for, and there's thousands and thousands of people that are employed by the Indiana Hardwood Association, you know, that are in that association.
Mhm.
There's thousands of jobs for people that are cutting down trees and making furniture out of trees. It's a whole sustainable industry. And Mitch Daniels was talking about how great this is and how much he's helping Indiana's economic development, our past governor Mitch Daniels, in Asia on the Southeast Asia tour. But did he thank the Civilian Conservation Corps for their work? Did he thank the soil scientists?
He took the credit himself.
He took credit for industry. You know, yeah, it's private sector industry that did all this. No, private sector industry didn't do all this. So what's the economic multiple on, so these workers that were unemployed, that the private sector was let them down through irrational exuberance and overinvestment in the wrong kind of soil, in the wrong kind of place, the wrong kind of farming. The bankers made bad investments, and these people are all out of work. They're going to starve to death in southern Indiana unless the government saves them. So the government saves them, puts them to work planting trees. Now, what do you think the economic value was of those socialistic, pure socialistic government workers in southern Indiana who were previously unemployed by the private sector and put to work for the government planting trees? What do you think the economic multiple would be on that, on the trees they planted? It totally exceeds anything that the private sector ever does in terms of economic development. Some government programs, and another two examples were the Depression era programs, the Hoover Dam and the Cooley Dam. The Great Grand Cooley Dam smelted all of the aluminum for a lot of the aircraft for World War II. All the energy that was produced by the Cooley Dam. The Cooley Dam was another work project administration, socialistic, 20th, 30th, 1920s program, government program where those workers created this dam that produce on the Columbia River in Oregon that produces so much energy still to this day. And the Hoover Dam powers all of Las Vegas. Those dams and the efficiency of how those were built, and also at that time, 1930s, like the Empire State Building, all these things have efficiencies. Like nowadays, we can't even renovate the Empire State Building and fix it up in the same amount of time that it took them back then to build it, with the modern technology, with the modern workers. So what's missing? What changed between the 1930s and now? How come government is so horribly inefficient now that it can't produce or do anything? And how come in the 1930s it could produce economic multiples that the private sector can never touch?
Well, I have a theory. It's probably the wrong theory, but I have a theory of why the government is so ineffective.
Okay.
So we talk about it on the show quite a bit, is the tension between the two spectrums.
Right.
Right. Then no work is getting done because they're so busy arguing and in an uproar and in this, this fantastic, huge argument we're having against each other. And so no progress is being made. Labor movement.
You said, why were people able to do stuff in the 30s and we aren't able to do it so much well today? Back then they had better representation.
It's better representation.
We had the Since then, we've killed the unions.
We've killed the unions.
So people aren't invested in their work anymore. Why should they work as efficient?
Why should they work as efficient? They're not invested in their work.
Yep.
They don't read the values. Yeah, I was reading some. Has anybody ever read any World Bank reports, like we study World Bank stuff?
We have. Go ahead.
So I just went to their website. Yeah, I'm a super economics geek. It's clear. The best place for me to be is, I think, in a government job doing this type of thing, and I can go to another country. I can go to another government somewhere and do it. But I want to do it for Elkhart, just because there's an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal that recently that says, what was it? It came out in like April or something like that. It was the future of our economy looks a lot like Elkhart. It was in the Wall Street Journal.
Oh yeah.
You remember that article? Yeah. So I mean, if that's true, then why should I move to some other country world just because I have this? I've got 2 diplomas from Indiana University. This is the best public administration.
Love that you brought these.
Yeah. So Sam pumped me up with the photos that I've got. I usually don't bring these out, but these are my bachelor's and master's diplomas here. I don't know if this is my bachelor's or master's, but yeah, here's my master's of science from School of Public and Environmental Affairs. There's only 2 other schools that are better schools for public economics and public government, public administration anywhere in the world. That's Harvard and Princeton. The third ranked one is SPIA. We've also had Eleanor Ostrom, who was there wandering the halls when I was there, won a Nobel Peace Prize for economics. And, when was it? I think it was, to look for the date, but I think it was like 2009. She won a Nobel. She's since passed away. But, I mean, it's crazy because it's like I knew Eleanor Ostrom. I didn't actually have a class with her, but her colleague Richard Parks, taught the same stuff, which is public economics. And you can go and get Eleanor Ostrom's books, and it's a lot of the same kind of stuff, like what works in government, what doesn't. How do you build systems of economics that work for people in governments? And she won a Nobel Peace Prize for that. And I'm just blessed I had an opportunity to learn all this stuff, and I would love to get on city council and be able to be a voice for this stuff, what actually works. And because we spend a lot of time fighting, there's that old theory that dumb people talk about people, average people talk about events, and smart people talk about ideas, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've invested a lot of time and effort and energy in my life and a lot of money in college. My parents a lot of money in college. They paid some of it, I paid some of it. I had student loans, I was blessed I didn't get overwhelmed by student loans because it was half the price then when I went to school as it is now. And
yeah, they're banging me over the head now. Yeah,
and my parents paid half of it, and I still paid student loans for a long time and paid them off eventually because I had good jobs in the 90s. But I'd love to give younger people these same opportunities that I just saw a taste of at the end, but actually came farther before me, times before me. But it's crazy, I got a good education, and I'd love to use it, and I'd love to do it because if it's true, and I believe it is somewhat true, it's not exactly as that article is built, because the article is probably praising the RV industry, how great it just naturally works. The Wall Street Journal. I haven't.
Arvis wrote an article. I think it was Arvis that wrote it. Did you read that about the Elkhart and how great the RV industry is? And did you happen to catch that?
I didn't catch that. I don't really pay attention to that stuff that he writes.
Well, I kind of pushed back on it because there's a lot of problems, and we won't get into that too much because I think kind of what you're saying is we put too much, we invest too much in this when it's you're talking about diversifying the
economy, right. And local ownership, making sure
local ownership.
Prioritization for TIF districts should be okay. Are you a local owner? Okay, you got lower priority if you're not. If you are a local owner, the same thing like this apartment complex. Why do we have to have a developer from Carmel? And why do we have to give them money to build a housing complex in downtown Elkhart, on that old foundry site?
Yeah, I don't really much care for that idea. I just don't think
it's corruption. It seems like to me.
It seems like, and if it's not, then it's they're over investing. Right, in that area because, and I think it's great that we have invested in the arts and entertainment district, right?
Right.
That's something that Elkhart needed. We had absolutely no culture in the downtown area for so long, and I grew up 2 blocks from there.
Right.
So, and now you go down there, and I'm
It wasn't really the best plan. I heard from some other people that kind of IU location that hasn't done really well, they would have had the learner would have been able to have a bigger backstage, is what I heard.
Yeah.
You heard that same story?
Yeah. And I went, I attended classes there at that satellite facility too. And my grandfather worked at the foundry. Matter of fact, it's probably where he got lung cancer from. But
my great grandfather died of what was called pleurisy, which was lung failure, which was he was a recent immigrant from. It's hard to say whether it's Poland or Germany because at the time that area was kind of wishy-washy in the late 19th century. But yeah, he worked for Oliver Plow Company in South Bend doing painting, which was probably lead-based paints on plows. Yeah, in 1910 with no worker protection, everything. So he died young, left my grandmother being raised by a single mom at like age 7 when he died as a result of his lung failure. Oliver family built that big Kopsha home and that whole big mansion. Everybody tours now with all the money they made. And they also built the Elkhart Hotel, which is being renovated right now.
yeah.
Their investment.
Are they turning that back into a hotel?
Yeah, they turned it back into a hotel. My Dan Beecher, who's actually, I like Dan Beecher a lot.
Yeah.
That's a guy that I really miss him being in Elkhart. I was really glad he ran for mayor. I would have loved to have seen him won because he knew the reality of economic development, still does.
Well, okay, because I know him on a different end of things. And I wish I could remember because he was was it DEI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I knew predecessors before that too. Than that.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then his old partner, Kelly, the lawyer. His last name's Kelly.
Okay.
He was our lawyer for the nonprofit.
Okay.
And also, I did a lot of work for him on his properties. When him and Dan split, I kept going with him.
Okay.
And me and Dan had a personal falling out. Like I had to call and threaten him, and he had my equipment and would give it back.
Oh, so, I didn't know that side of Dan.
But yeah, and unfortunately, I had to meet that side of him. But I do want to say in his favor that he did have a great idea of what they were trying to do.
Dan has economic vision. I miss Dan because, and I have seen him recently.
He's in South Bend now, right?
Yeah, he's in South Bend, but he was the main voice. He's the main public relations frontman for that Elkhart Hotel project, and he's an investor in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad it's getting fixed up. I hope it works as a hotel. I don't know the details of the level of economic development. I haven't studied. I think there's some public money there, maybe not. That's a good project. Dan always seems to be involved with these projects that seem to be pretty good, and some of his economic vision, and he's got a plan. He recognizes, and we had a conversation about the time he was running for mayor about the whole eye-rolling thing. We need to bring these big companies in here,
mm-hmm.
and he.
Sorry, it wasn't Kelly. It was Shelley.
Shelley. Okay, Shelley. Shelley Moore?
No, last name's Shelley.
Oh, it's a attorney. That's right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There's a
just came to my mind.
business consultant named Shelley Moore that I worked with in the past that did good work. Anyway, Dan was a guy that had a good vision, and he understood some of the local ownership and import substitution. He understood that the model of let's bring this big company in here rarely works.
Yeah.
He knew that was a fallacy, and he had the data to back it up. And he said the national economic development industry is almost starting to accept that now after going for decades of failure with that kind of vision, because those things are so rare anywhere. And every local economic development association is trying to land the big fish. Let's bring in corporate headquarters for Google. And it's just so pie in the sky.
Yeah.
What they should be doing is let's get this corner market owned by the people that are buying from that corner market, so they can. So back to the World Bank. I was looking at some third world countries models where they're talking about how the return on investment for like one worker will make 5 or 10,000 or $15,000, let's say in Indonesia or Laos or Cambodia, and their economic value in Laos is only 40,000, but in Cambodia it's 80,000 per worker or for. And this, you got to wrap your head around this, okay? Okay, so here's the total economic value for employees that is in third world countries, let alone first world countries, is almost an order of magnitude higher. You can have somebody who's making $10,000 a year in Cambodia who's making $80,000 of economic benefit for the company they work for. And those models are available from the World Bank. Now, I'll bet you it's even higher. I don't know what the numbers is for the United States, but maybe the RV industry. Say one RV worker making, what's a good way, 60,000 a year for production worker, 50?
Actually, there's a huge discrepancy in those numbers because every time I read a report, they say, and this kind of goes back to the article I think was authored by Arvis, where he's talking about the average income of the RV worker in Elkhart was something like $75,000 to $90,000 a year, and how they couldn't keep big trucks on the lots because we're buying up $20,000-$40,000 trucks, and that's just not true. The average worker that I know makes under 40,000.
Okay,
and that's the truth of it. And that's one of the things that kind of makes me mad when we talk about the RV industry and the media. Like, I understand there has to be some kind of marketable value there in whatever article they may put out, right? But there's a reality there that they're not talking about, and it's disconnecting, your local residents from. It's kind of like what you were saying about how, and I think the council is kind of guilty of this too, is how businesses will forget about their roots, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's where I think our city council is disconnected with the population.
The city council needs to be representing the people, and the people are not wealthy people. So here we go.
Ever you want to pull up those statistics? You need me to have her pull those up? Because we can pull them up.
Oh yeah, let's pull up the statistics right now.
So it's going to be the one.
So when I listen to economic downtown development people and city people, I think about the line from The Great Gatsby, where Americans never think of themselves as poor people. They think themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Yep, that's a wonderful line.
And Elkhart thinks of itself, and the council people thinks of itself as a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, right? If we only get these downtown economic projects going, then we're going to be able to bring these wealthy people in to live in these luxury apartments in downtown Elkhart, and they're going to help our whole economy because they're rich people coming in.
That's
right?
A huge speculation.
I haven't seen anything other than huge speculations off of those numbers. But again, it's like a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. We're on city council. We're temporarily embarrassed rich people, right?
Our bandwidth isn't big enough.
Oh, it'll come in. It's city debt. It's not really super.
Hope it's not glitching the video.
Yeah. So this is our poverty rate data. So Elkhart, Indiana, is a poor community. Yeah, it's coming in.
Yeah, my whole house is like a smart house. We got the Echoes, we have smart light bulbs, TVs everywhere. So like we just tell everything to do what it needs to do, and it does it. And so yeah, our bandwidth gets messed with a little bit.
Oh, okay. I don't have all that because I really don't find a lot of value in those things because I can type it 70 words a minute or something. So I don't know.
I just like to be able to come in and say Echo, turn my lights on, or we're home, or something like that.
I've got some notes on it if it doesn't actually come up.
You got notes? Let's review that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the budget right now that Nice had, because that's what City Council mainly does is look at the budget. While this is coming in, we can talk about that.
Okay.
So Nice's budget in 2018 was $74 million, which is $1,423 of spending for every resident of the city. Okay. And then the budget goes up to $80 million. Which is a 10% increase for 2019. So yeah, I think the data is coming in now, but I'll talk about it, and then we can look at the numbers by age, which is really startling. A 10% increase in the 2019 budget.
Scroll down.
Yeah,
It's at the bottom of the page.
Yep, it's at the bottom page is the bar chart. That's what I want to see. So
Yeah, keep going.
yep, you'll get it. Yeah, here we go. We can start there. Residents with income below the poverty level. Perfect. You hit the right spot, right where it went off.
We're going to let them see it too.
Okay.
Go ahead, double click. Yep, double click that, and then go back over to the full screen.
So residents with income below the poverty level in 2016. Elkhart, 32.5%. The entire state of Indiana, 18.5%. Residents with income below 50% of the poverty level. So what is the poverty level? Like 15,000, 16,000? What is it? Does anybody know what
I
I
think it's under 20, right?
Yeah,
20
it's somewhere
under,
between
yeah.
10 and 20. So these are people that are half, below 50%. So that means you're making less than $10,000 a year, the same as an average person in a third world country would make.
Actually, I think poverty level is anything below 40.
But look at the second one. Yeah,
24?
24. Okay, so the first one's 24,000. So 32.5% are, so it's almost twice as high as the whole rest of the state of Indiana, okay?
Mhm.
This is a place that's spending millions of dollars to build luxury apartments downtown, okay? That's the context of this. This is the type of community we are. Residents with income below 50% of the poverty level, so those are people making $12,000 a year or less maybe, or $10,000, somewhere in that or less.
Are these the numbers you were looking for?
Let's see. Yeah, here's our federal poverty level, 2017. So it's lower. So persons in the household, if there's 4 people in the household, then it's 24,000. 3, it's 20,000. 2, it's 16,000. Or 1 person in the household, it's 12,000. Okay, so that gives you some context. So that means like a family of 4. If you have 2 kids that you're trying to support, you're doing it with a household income of $24,000 a year. That's tight.
That's real tight.
Real tight. So, I mean, so the 32% of people in Elkhart are doing that. Only 18% in the whole state are. Residents with income below 50% of the poverty level, 9.5%. Whole state, 6.4%. So
I just want to reiterate that the articles you read are telling you that the average RV worker in Elkhart is making $90,000 a year. So
yeah, I've read those same articles, and I'm extremely skeptical. I don't know how they get to those numbers. I'd love to have somebody explain to me how they get to those numbers.
well, maybe we can have him on one day and he can tell us.
I'll be debating him.
That's an open invitation.
Open invitation. Arvis, you can do next. And then soon I'll be debating him. So
A lot of these guys don't know what to think about me, you know.
oh, they don't. Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I've known what to think about you for a long time, Sam. I've loved all the work you do. So
Thank you.
Disability rate in the city among poor males. Here's something. I mean, you think the RV industry has anything to do with tripling the disability rate in Elkhart? Poverty rate among disabled females is a little higher. But so you get the idea. Now, if you can roll down to the bar chart at the margin. So, okay, so here we go. Before you go all the way down, let's go up to the rentling. Let's go about home ownership. This would be something good to have. Okay, like if you're a big businessman and you want to come into Elkhart, and if you could roll up just a teeny bit, I want to get that very last statistic before we go to the bar chart. Okay, stop right there. Yeah. So that very last one right there, renting rate in the city among poor and non-poor residents. So residents below poverty level, okay, that rent don't get to keep any of their own money for themselves for housing. They don't even get a little bit on a mortgage or anything back. It just goes away as soon as they pay it. Money's gone. 72.9%. People who rent, 42.7%, and most people rent, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of poor people in Elkhart, okay? 32.5% below the poverty level in 2016. So this is, in this city, what are we doing right now with our government? We are having a 10% increase in the 2019 budget underneath to $80 million, on which is translating to $1,500 per resident being spent on what? What is our city increasing spending on? The economic development of luxury homes that these people will never own.
Yeah. And that was one of my biggest pushbacks on it too. Is like it just seems so out of place, and I've been here my entire life.
Now let's look at these people. Who these people are by age group. Under 5 years of age. Okay, looks like it's about 25% of people, of children under 5 years of age, are poverty level. So that means that you have, let's say there's 2 kids in that household. The entire family's making $24,000 a year. 1 out of every 4 kids is below that. Okay, 5 years. Look at the 5-year-old one. That blows me away.
Yeah, was that
Over
65%?
No, oh yeah, it's over 50%. It's like 60%. 5-year-olds.
Yep.
In Elkhart. And look at it. The gray bar, the greenish bar, is the rest of the state.
Yeah.
So we have twice as many children in extreme poverty. I didn't say it's extreme poverty because extreme poverty is in the third world, but it's poverty. But it's still
compared to the rest of the state, it's sitting at something like what, 20%?
Right, like 20%, which is still too high for the United States of America. But
sure.
Look at breakdown by age of poor female residents in Elkhart. 12 to 14-year-olds. Almost 50% of teenagers in Elkhart are growing up poor by U.S. standards, and it's less than half that in the rest of Indiana. And yet, our city council is temporarily embarrassed millionaires, right? We're not as rich as we used to be, so we need to invest in these luxury apartments. And these luxury apartments will create so much good for all these people that live in these neighborhoods. Now, you grew up, in that part of close to downtown. Mm-hmm. You were a downtown kid in Elkhart. Can you tell me the mechanism that a wealthy apartment complex would actually help you as a poor kid growing up in downtown Elkhart? When a big, wealthy apartment complex comes in and is built, how is that going to help you?
I haven't seen a way that it's going to help at all. At best, it's going to create a few jobs in that, like the restaurant, barista, coffee shop.
Right, a couple of jobs, handful of 2 or 3.
Not enough to make up for that decision, I think.
And there'll be, what kind of jobs will those be in those restaurants or baristas or something?
Poverty level jobs.
Poverty level jobs. So
serving the luxury market.
So that's what our city council is investing in right now. That's how they think that $1,500 per resident, every single one of those people has $1,500. You could take, let's say a third of that or a quarter of that, the city budget would go to those kids for some program like Tolson Center or something like that. And that's, and the people, the residents
wonderful point.
And so that's what we're up against right now in the current city council. That's why we need to change. And I appreciate a forum to be able to come on and talk to about it, about this stuff. Because who actually is someone that's trained by, in public economics in a program with one of the best programs in the world for it.
It's like one of the top 5 business schools.
Yeah, it's like one of the top 5 business schools. But I went to one of the top 5 government schools. Mm-hmm. And I previously was working for one of the best government consulting firms in D.C. and Philadelphia. And, helping the EPA build really, really efficient government systems.
This has been your work.
This is, well, it's the work that I would like to do, but I haven't always been able to do it because it's not the work that's mostly going on in most governments in most of America, especially in this part of the country and especially in Elkhart. So it's, but I want to do it here very badly because it seems to be so poorly needed. You have this disconnect. You have someone that is willing and able to do this kind of work who needs to go in there and help, 50% of the 5-year-olds that are in poverty in Elkhart.
Well, I think one of the things is important, and I don't mean to keep returning to this point, but it's, like I said, there's been this disconnect from, I'll just stick to city council. There's been a disconnect with city council to its community,
right,
where it's making decisions, and then you see an outpour of the community going, no, we don't think that's a good idea. I mean, right, even with the luxury apartments, I mean, I don't know what the newspapers were saying.
I was there. I was there for the council meeting, and there wasn't a single resident that showed up to that meeting that actually supported it.
Right.
From all groups. We had wealthy apartment owners, people that were local owners, that really didn't like the idea of competition being created with phony numbers being provided from
and then we got to pay
outside investors in Carmel that we had to pay for.
Yeah.
So they're paying. So let's say you are a local entrepreneur who's paying tens, if not hundreds. I don't know how much money you pay in property taxes on a big apartment building or apartment complex. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And that tax money is being used to create competition from outside investors against you.
Right.
So they didn't like it. Obviously, I wouldn't if I was a business owner in an apartment complex.
Well, that is, you just don't see the utility of it.
No. And then you have poor people that are saying, why do we need luxury apartments? We need more housing. 70% of poor people are paying rent. We need more like habitat homes. We need more things like that.
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing. Yeah. Why not invest in things that the residents will actually use, invest in them? Here's
the other thing, man, is I think they're trying to implicate some kind of culture here that just isn't organic.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they keep
it's
trying
not
to.
Us.
Right. It's not.
It's
us.
the temporarily embarrassed millionaires, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I mean, I love the big theater. I think downtown is beautiful, and I implore.
Right.
I
There's been a lot of good investments
Carol
there.
had a lot to do with that too. I know she pushed that a lot.
Dan Beecher was very involved in that downtown economic development when I was working for this group. I did some presentations at local business associations. Yeah.
Tim Shelley.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my buddy.
I don't know Tim real well.
He's a great guy.
I'd like to meet him. Cool.
Great guy.
Think you'd like to talk economics with me?
I don't know. I don't know. We're friends on more of a personal level, and then
Cool.
we kind of developed a business relationship. But I think there's a huge disconnect, and it's almost like, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's almost like they're doing it in spite of the residents.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when they have these big developments going on, I mean, even Moore's last pitch, which was the overpass, right? A lot of people said they didn't want that, and yet it still happens.
It still happens, yeah.
And it seems like a theme.
And it's not limited to just Democrats or Republicans. It's not just Democrats that are doing this. It's not just Republicans that are doing this. We have both the Moore administration and also the administrations that are from the Republicans, like now the city council, that are all openly defying the will of the people.
Yeah, and that's not your job. Like, here's the thing: is okay, we understand, like, you live here, right? But this is our home too,
right?
And our voices. I mean, we deserve to be heard.
Right.
I mean, and I don't mean to pat my own back, but I can only speak from my own position. But I grew up down here. I grew up in Elkhart. I probably know the details of most of the neighborhoods and the rivers and everything about it more than a lot of the city council members do.
Right.
And there's this huge disconnect, and I think they're going to lose out that way. And I hate to see that we keep investing in these mega structures that don't make any sense. This aquatic center. Who's going to be able to afford? We could barely afford to go to the Y. I mean, kids like me, like I had to work for my membership.
Before the Y went out, I actually met with one of their board members because I was making a little bit less than I had made before in the past. I was only making it was not some of the highest paying jobs I'd made before. And so I had a family, I had young kids, and I had some in gymnastics, and it's like $90 for a gymnastics program, is $175 for membership there. And I'm just like, this just isn't sustainable for the middle class. And he says, well, you're kind of in that little gap in the middle. There's poor residents, get subsidized, and then wealthy people can afford to pay it. But the middle class, you're kind of in a weird thing. It's like the middle class doesn't really exist anymore, so we really don't have fees that are set up for you.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. So it's like they really, they weren't serving their people, and they failed.
I don't think they are still. I mean, this is the way I feel about it.
There's a lot of benefits to the aquatic center, though, with the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Pools were wearing out, so they need to be replaced to centralize it. You can bring in some. I'm not so against the aquatic center. I think there were some good investments maybe made there because it is so unique. I wouldn't
be if I knew that there was going to be some kind of program to let kids like me in.
And that's what needs to happen. See, that's a different question than should it exist at all.
Right.
I think that a different question is what kind of funding and who's going to provide the funding so that local residents who are poor can actually use it. And that's kind of different than it shouldn't happen because it's not a good idea. I think it is a good idea. It's a unique product. There isn't anything like this that exists. The economic model has been shown that it's unique enough and that it will draw outside people in for these swim meets. There'll be a lot of competitions here. It's going to replace two pools that were failing at the high schools. The schools couldn't afford on their own to replace. I think the general big picture is good, but like you said, it needs to be used for the programs to make it available to everyone.
And I have a personal bias, like to build that place, they tore down the house I grew up in.
Oh, okay.
In my old neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
Let me just put that on top of that. And I didn't mean to lump the aquatic center in, because I do realize it's a completely different entity and has a completely different utility than what the luxury apartments do.
Right.
But I'm just, I guess I've just got caught up in, all the new stuff that's going on.
Well, there's been $100 million of new investments in downtown. That's the good news.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news is there's over 10 million of subsidies. So it says like our current system is that subsidies for the rich are not called subsidies. That's not socialism, right? That's economic development. But if it doesn't actually serve the people that are actually there, then what is it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I'm saying is, like, listen to your people. My hope is that you get elected into this seat.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I do
I support you there.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it.
Unless you say some really radical stuff over the next year or so, you probably have my vote. But it's just, I think that probably needs restructured. And, they can watch this and decide not to listen to me if they want to. But here's the thing: is I'm a pretty well-known guy in almost all walks of life in Elkhart. Like, you know me if you're in politics. You know me if you work in the RV industry. You know me if you stand in the welfare line. You know.
Right.
And so I think it validates some of the things I'm saying about, you guys on the council need to rethink your position with the residents here, because you work for us, right? Like,
that's a good thing to rethinking. That's a great statement. When I was like,
you have the opportunity to do it. Just do it.
Right. And I did a lot of thinking when I was younger, but I did a lot of rethinking. It was during my time working for the Truth newspaper as a market research manager. I started to do this economic research, and I kind of went down this rabbit hole where, like, wait a second, how come there's this disconnect between what actually works for people and what we're doing? And I don't know if you've ever heard, there's an Indian philosopher named Rumi that was around about 1,000 years ago, and he has this whole parable of the elephant where people go into a dark room and take 10 people to some in a dark room and have them touch an elephant. One person will touch the tusk, one person will touch the trunk, one person will touch the tail, one person will touch, the hoof of the elephant, and then they'll go out and say, okay, what did you touch? Well, one person will describe, okay, I touched this soft thing that's wiggling around, or there's the trunk. Someone says, well, I touched this swishing thing, it's the tail. Somebody, I touched this hard, solid thing. Well, what do they do then? Well, they could argue with you, no, that's not what it is. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're an idiot. Mm-hmm. Or they could compare notes and say, and then between all the people that touched one part of it, now they've created this view that no one person could have. They've seen the whole object. And that's what happened to me when I first read The Smallmart Revolution. It was like, how come we're not doing this model of local economic development with local ownership and import substitution when this is clearly the best way to create the best economic multiple, not only for our business, but for the entire community. And then I started to realize all the other ways that the ultra rich, the investment class, is basically being served our tax dollars instead of the people that actually are the ones that produce the tax dollars themselves, that with their labors.
They could get used from it.
They could get used from it to help them, which is what government's supposed to do, the programs, supposed to help the people that are there. They're the ones with the votes. Why shouldn't get the people that are voting in their politicians that represent their economic interests? Mm-hmm. How come that's not happening? Because I understand what their economic interest is based on how I've been educated on this, so I think that helps me. So,
well, I think you're in touch with people too. Like, you're pretty active on social media.
Just the canvassing, getting involved. Occupy movement was amazing. To be able to sit on a park bench and watch as one of the wealthiest attorneys in South Bend sat down with a homeless person, and they talked about what's going on in their world, and what things need to change, and they had a conversation on that picnic table, and they shared information, and that stuff just doesn't happen enough or happen all the time. And there's times and places where I was there helping to facilitate that, and it was the most amazing stuff. And so, how much time do we have left?
We're gonna have to go to questions here in a minute, but I want to make this I want to kind of clarify something here. I don't think it's solely the responsibility of the city council to go out and engage the public, right? The public needs to take responsibility too as voters and engage their council at the same time. Like, go to the city council meetings, be involved in the local government. And when you go to vote, you know, don't abstain from voting because you're scared of the big name on the ticket. Because your local politics is what's going to affect you the most.
And I've got statistics on that. So everybody focuses on the president, right, which is maybe responsible for half of the power with federal spending, which is 20% of all the government spending. State and local, state is 8% and local is 10%. Okay, so that means if you add up state and local government spending, it's at least as much as federal government spending.
Yep.
How many people I talked to a lot of people that said, well, you know, I vote for the president and that's it because he's got all the power.
Well, there's a lot of people that get scared from even voting because of the big ticket or the big ticket names.
Right.
So they'll just, we're watching the recent political shit show and be like, well, I don't like Trump or Hillary, so I'm just not going to vote.
I'm not going to vote at all.
Yeah,
right.
And it's just like,
well, wait a second. Okay,
community.
so now you are basically, because those people control half of the power of all the money that you spend to the government, you're going to do nothing now?
Right.
Because local government is 10%. Okay, so if I'm on city council, now I can be a voice for 1/4 of all the spending that you make in tax dollars.
Yeah.
Because that's local.
Yeah.
That's to your local city.
And
what dollars can benefit you the most?
is your local money.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I'm saying is like, and I've made the point, 3 or 4 times on the podcast, how very important it is, even to your neighbor and your family, that you go and make these votes, because these are the people who decide whether you can get a road in your front yard.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or annex your property for whatever.
If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Yep, that's it.
And so you got to have somebody that represents you. And that's hard because a lot of people are going to campaign one way and get in and change their mind.
And for people that don't understand why you need representation, I urge you to read Thomas Paine, Rights of Man, and what's the other pamphlet? I've got it upstairs.
That's going to kind of segue. I watched some of your last podcast was on the Enlightenment and some of that stuff. I read some. I was trying to get the background of your show, your flavor, and what's going on. So I said some of them. And
it's a different flavor every night.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of cool, man. Taste the rainbow, like Skittles. But this book is an interesting one. It talked about how people.
Let me see it.
Yeah, this is The Political Mind.
The Political Mind by George Lakoff.
So this book is interesting because it's by a modern cognitive psychologist who basically talks about how people think about their politics and how they vote and how to communicate to them. But what's interesting on the bottom here is like why you can't understand 21st century American politics with an 18th century brain. Well, what's the 18th century brain? It's the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
So those of us that are so into the Enlightenment, we can't talk to people the way that they normally think about politics.
Well, and I think
because they don't think about it as telling, we have to connect to their lives and with stories.
We won't get into the Enlightenment because we need to go to questions here.
Okay, we'll go to questions. But that's the tie into that. If you read that book, you can connect the last podcast to this one.
So I just I just made a point tonight that before you got here that people think the Enlightenment was, it is a historical thing. Sure, it started in history, right, in the long 18th century, but I don't think we're done with it.
No,
we're not. There.
We're not there because people.
As long as we are using reason,
right,
to get to where we're going, we're still in the Enlightenment period.
We're in the Enlightenment period, but we have to translate that reason into the narratives that are the stories, which is what all the great teachers do. They'll tell stories that explain how and why in a way that you understand that these things work.
So let's go to questions here real quick. Do we have anything on the live feed? Can I see that? See this here real quick. Yeah, you
would be happy to answer any questions that anybody in the audience has.
I didn't see any. We don't do well live on Facebook a lot of times.
I think it'll build over time. It's still a new thing.
Yeah. Some big questions to unpack here.
All
we only got a few minutes, so we'll try to get through them.
Okay.
Okay, so Spitfire.
Okay.
What are your plans economically with Elkhart County?
Elkhart County, Or the city.
We have to say city, yeah.
So, of Elkhart City. One plan that I have, which would be a good one, is right now we have TIF money that's available for big businesses, okay? But let's say you're like me. You're a guy that goes in that says, I'm going to take this property and that's totally derelict, that depresses the value of the whole neighborhood because it's shot, or there's an empty lot here, and there needs to be a house that's built here. And so the tax increment financing means that it's based on the idea that we're going to give you a break on your taxes if you come in here because you're going to raise the value of everybody's stuff, right? So there'll be more tax that comes in because there's more value. So that's it says it's supposed to be break even. That is done for business, but it's not done for residents. Why shouldn't residents get the same opportunities that business people get to renovate their own homes and get a tax break for increasing the economic value of their neighborhood? So that's one project that I want to do.
My uncle would love you. He just absolutely would love you, man.
Cool, man. Hopefully he lives in Elkhart. I hope you vote for me.
He passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry, man.
Hopefully
his spirit will help me.
We'll go into spirit
He's
talk.
still registered to
So,
vote.
okay, so what can you bring to council that is that due? What can you bring to council due to your policy experience that politicos cannot?
Politicos?
Yeah, like you talked a lot about your experience more as a policy guy than as like a political operative.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think it goes to just the public economics that I've studied. You know, studying at a school where you had a Nobel laureate, where they're there to teach how you use government to help the economy. I can go back to the very first class that I took. My very first class on my very first day was involved with that, like how, not just the mechanisms, but what particular programs are government good at economically, what are they bad at? So, I mean, I've learned that from day one at IU.
Nice. So why an independent ticket?
That is a great question, because I ran into some older people that actually convinced me of this last time I ran. That they said, well, why don't you just run as a Democrat or Republican? All local politicians are all the same. They all act in the same way. Well, not anymore. We saw this group that came into council right now, this that actually were making ideological decisions based on like closing down Tolson Center that were unlike any other local politicians. We have some extreme Republicans in right now. I used to be a Republican. I was born and raised Republicans in South Bend with Republicans, and we would laugh at all the things that the Democrats would do.
Such great credibility.
Yeah.
No,
so, but over time, the kind of Republicans that I was born and raised with, I don't see those kind of people anymore, because like my parents and grandparents, they care about poor people. They care about helping poor people. They don't have this ideological basis. We're just going to shut down Tolson Center or privatize it. You know, they would be told. My parents are still alive. They're totally opposed. They think it's crazy, and none of them are Republicans anymore. They're all independents.
Well, there's an interesting conversation we had there, because we talk about political climate change all the time.
Right.
About how these parties tend to switch.
That's right. If with what happened with the election of Trump right now, the Republican part, the Democratic Party that elected William Jennings Bryan those kind of people look extremely similar to Trump voters.
Mm-hmm.
But they were Democrats in the 19th century.
Yep. It's a weird phenomenon. Like, I mean, we tend to refer back to Lincoln, right? Who wanted to abolish slavery, but he was a Republican.
Right.
You know, we don't see those same values.
I guess what makes me different is that I'm still a guy that's running from the policy perspectives. I'm still the same guy that I was when I was 20. I'm not really that interested in winning or being elected just because I'm a party boss. I'm in tight with a particular party, which is a lot of why these people are elected in general. I'm going to go from a pure policy perspective, win or lose.
So that's why the independent.
That's right.
Absolutely. I like it. Here's an interesting one. This number 4 here is going to be too big to unpack for the end of the show.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So as a small businessman, how would you stimulate small business?
Local ownership and import substitution is all about selling the goods or services the people need in that economy, in that neighborhood, to them, sold to them by people that manufacture or sell or market as many of those things themselves as business owners there. That's what it's all about. So, for example, the first place to start is with local produce and local vegetables. I had a big garden last year that was booming. I gave a lot of it away, but I grew dozens and dozens of pounds of vegetables. But what was crazy, what I learned later, is that it was valuable. Like, some people would like, man, this is beautiful organic kale. I'll give you a $20 bill for 5 pounds of kale, and it's a heck of a good deal, and because it's competitive with the market. And immediately, my backyard, boom, I'm competitive like that with a vegetable garden. And we can start doing that through a food hub. That's a long thing. So this last question that we don't have time for, go ahead and give it to me, and I'll write the answer out, put it out there, as on my campaign site in the future, and I'll answer the question completely, whatever it is.
Okay. So how do you solve big problems, public, private?
It's solved through a lot of communication with everyone, all the stakeholders and policyholders, in a civil fashion. Again, there's this whole thing about political correctness. I had a great mentor with civility. Here's a great example. Look at the founding of this country, some of the compromises over slavery. What led to the Civil War was slavery, right? Mm-hmm. But there was almost a civil war. There was certainly a massive disagreement that almost prevented the article, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution even being written, because this whole argument over slavery for the Constitution,
Thomas Jefferson struggled greatly with that.
They all struggled greatly. It was a big problem. Slavery was a huge problem with the founding of the country. How did they get through it? They were able to compromise with each other, even though they really disagreed with each other on high moral grounds. I mean, this was a moral problem. Yeah. Slavery was considered to be moral because it's in the Bible by some people and immoral by others. It's just like abortion is today, or these other moral issues. Mm-hmm. But instead of fighting about it and not solving it, and if their side won to take all the power, then they worked out these compromises. And these compromises didn't even make a lot of sense. A slave is so much percentage of a person in this one state, but yet some states have it and some states don't. These compromises were like not very rational even, but they were still made, and they resulted in the United States of America being able to be founded, and all the other good things that led to the first, democracy in the modern times, the first democratic republic in 1,000 years. Yeah. And they did it. They got through the slavery issue. It wasn't perfect. It still blew up 80 years later. Yeah. But you know what? At least they got it started. And that's how we do it. We have to work together in a civil fashion, say, okay, even though we disagree on these fundamental issues, let's work out a compromise and just let's get through it, and so we can get other things done.
And we can build on that.
We can build on that win, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good answer, man. Really good answer.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we're a little over 2 hours now. You got anything you want to add to, anything you want to put in?
I appreciate the time, man. This is a great forum. It's been very great to have this kind of forum, because I'm the kind of person that wants to teach this to people, and I hope to be able to win. I hope to get enough votes. I'm going to be working hard to do that. But the important part, even beyond me winning this race, is just the teaching of people these concepts. They're kind of, I almost feel like Book of Eli sometimes, okay? So that movie about the last guy alive, because we were in a dystopian place where all the knowledge has been destroyed and the Bible's been completely wiped out. So this guy memorizes the whole Bible to keep it going. Mm-hmm. There's no places to have this conversation, but I almost feel like I've gotten to the place, the lab at the end, where Eli gets the chance to document everything again, everything out of his mind. And that's what this place feels like, man. And it's good to be here, because I can get this out into the public, and more people can pick up on what real public economics is. Because when people talk about economics, a lot of the conservatives will only talk about private economics. It's like everything started during the Enlightenment, and you can go from like 18th century, not even 19th century economics, and then all of a sudden it stops at Ayn Rand. It's like there's nothing there's nothing since then, and there's nothing on the government, what actually does work with the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of the Enlightenment, and I think it plays an important role into where we're going, where we've been. And
if we had the kind of economy that we had in the 18th century, more libertarian economics works a little bit better. But it all should be based on that. There's no doubt that's the basis, but there's then certain things that we need to do to actually not make it more necessarily owned by the government, but to make it more possible that smaller people and more poor people can recover more economic value for themselves off their own work and keep that money for themselves in their community, and actually improve the community.
And actually build your community economically
Right, build
from
your
within.
From within,
Yeah, absolutely. It's better. I think you get more sustainability that way as well.
I appreciate the opportunity, man. Thanks for the opportunity to kind of get this out of my head and start the race here, man. Couldn't be a better place to do it.
Thanks
Sam.
for coming, man. I really appreciate it. And because I just want to touch on something real quick. We have these long form conversations just for exactly what he was talking about. Is you're so used to having, your news delivered to you in these 3 to 5 minute segments
Right.
where you can't unpack ideas. But and this gives this type of long form conversation. It gives it an opportunity to happen where we can sit down and unpack ideas and actually let you get to know your candidates, your local. We're doing the sheriff on Monday, so I mean you get to know these things.
Brad's good, man. I look forward to that interview too.
Yeah,
Brad.
that's gonna be a good one.
Great career, and talk about law enforcement, and other people can hopefully unpack that conversation and get the ideas from what led to Brad Rogers' success, and move that forward in other police departments throughout the country.
And we have a great replacement coming in behind him too, Jeff Siegel. I mean, Jeff's equally as great, I think.
That's great.
I've
heard good things about him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a really, really great guy.
I don't know him real well as Brad, but appreciate it, man.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So if you guys like what you see here today, you click that subscribe button down there at the bottom of our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Out of the Armchair Podcast. On Instagram, Out of the Armchair Podcast, all one word, and Twitter @ofArmchair.
I'm Tom Butler. I'm running for City Council at large. So
make sure you go vote for him, follow his campaign, and make the best decision possible you think you can make. So
thanks a lot, Sam.
Yep. All right. So with that being said, I guess I will see you later.